I think it got a little bit more engineered over the years because you're trying to bridge the difference between what the producer wants for their assets and what investors willing to pay for their assets. I mean, in the earlier days, you look at this as straight out sale transaction. That gets I would say, generally speaking, gets a little bit harder to get done just because the value differentials between the two parties, and it gets morphed into, more often than not, some kind of engineered transaction. So the producer, like for example, take the reversionary type of deal as example, the producer would get most of the interest back after certain triggers are met. It gives some incentive to bridge that gap between the price a producer wants to sell for and the investor is willing to buy for. And with the commodity price fluctuating over the last year, combined with a hedging that investor can do, those type of transactions can allow the deal to happen without overly negotiating between the two parties trying to figure out the right price. And kick it to Zach and Paul for their experience in the commercial side.
Meng, question. So the Antero deal with 6th Street was an 85% reversionary interest back to Antero, 15% for 6th Street. When you're looking at reversionary structures, and happy for anyone else to jump in, is there kind of an established norm, or is that really negotiated company by company? Because you look at standard, right? 75% NRI, 25% or working interest, is like a standard kind of floor for operated deals, for instance. Is there kind of a common template that the industry can follow on reversionary structures?
I wouldn't say there's a common template. There's maybe some floor. The tail won't be less than certain amount that people generally agree to. This is more simplified way to describe a reversionary structure. You can do it in many different ways. You can do it on asset-based reversionary structure. You can do it with entity-based structure through waterfall. I would say a lot of the economics can be negotiated between the investor and the producer based on the particular deal, the basin, and how the economics is going to play out. There's a range of things that can happen. I don't think there's a very set, this is what, I mean, you won't point something out and say, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be a little bit bespoke among the producers and the investor, and also depending on the basin and economics. But Zach, Paul, and Tom probably have other, yeah, go ahead.
I could jump in on Antero. I mean, so we were working through that deal for a good portion of time in the first half of 2020. As everybody knows, commodity prices changed quite a bit during that time. And so what the reversionary structure allowed us to do is we were focused on making sure, we come from a credit background. And so we were focused on making sure that there was some downside protection through hedging and otherwise. But, we were focused on making sure we were there for Antero in a roller coaster of last spring. And what the reversionary structure allowed us to do is keep that downside protection, keep that asset value that we had agreed upon, and come through. And so I think it's just a push and pull of, do you want to take a little bit more risk and get a little bit more upside? Do you want to take a little bit more downside protection and take a little bit less upside? And so obviously the smaller tail that you have in a reversionary structure, the more capped your upside is. The flip side of that is, there's certain things that we have in the Antero deal, for instance, an earnout and otherwise, that allow us to, have some of that downside protection. In addition, when we look at the world, we look at it and say, if we can hedge commodity prices and lock in that asset value, especially in a reversionary structure, we're incentivized to do that because we do cap our upside. So I think there's a lot of kind of toggles, but our goal is execution certainty and making sure that with a volatile commodity price, you don't end up where the two sides have to retrade a deal, and that structure allows us to do that.
The thing I would add to that as well is the, you know, it ultimately also factors into the goal of the seller here. So, you know, if the goal is to maximize proceeds, you could minimize tail, and conversely, you know, if they view significant upside in the future, you know, they're going to want to maximize the tail for their side. So certainly some of it comes into play with regard to individual seller incentives.
Yeah, I would also add that when you put all the incentives together, especially for engineered transactions, you want to look at the accounting and tax analysis structuring upfront to make sure everybody is on the same page, so avoiding accusation of retrade down the road. And there's certain minimum requirements, I would say, is required due to engineered structure to satisfy tax and the GAAP accounting requirements.